Good morning. Welcome. Welcome to the daily newspaper analysis. And I am Bhuvan as I welcome each one of you who's watching me live and who will be watching me through the course of the day and later on. All right. Once again, welcome to each one of you. And today is an important day because, again, we have important articles to have a look at. But more importantly, we will also take a look at the articles from the mains perspective. Okay? Because the two articles that I have selected for you today, they are questions wherein firstly, you need to know facts. And secondly, you need to have an opinion. A sense of analysis is required for the two articles, the three articles in fact, that we have today, or two articles. Okay? So a sense of analysis needs to be developed for these particular articles that I have for you going forward for mains. However, before I start with the articles, now I have to address this. I had given out my email ID for students who wanted some sort of help, grievance redressal, doubt resolution, and some of you reached out to me regarding the recent prelims paper, okay? And I can understand the frustration, guys, okay? I completely empathize with you that, well, the CSAT paper was difficult. Like I said during the live stream that evening also, wherein we discussed the CSAT passages, I told you that yes, it's a difficult paper, no denying that. However, I still see many of you lingering in that hangover, you know, and it does not benefit anyone, guys. Please understand that. Okay, most of you may not have aced the paper too, but then learn from it. Okay, because you know what? Across YouTube, you will find many people tell you, UPSC was wrong, UPSC was absolutely unfair. Yes, they do have a fair point, but then that sort of opinion does not benefit the students. Okay, it's good for garnering likes and retweets and all of that, but then there is no takeaway for the student there. Because please realize, you have signed up for this process. UPSC didn't ask you to come and appear for UPSC now, did it? So be prepared for any eventuality that UPSC throws at you. The lesson that you can learn from all of this, especially for those of you who are still in that hangover of CSAT paper 2, well, I can tell you only one thing. Prepare in a manner in which you cannot blame UPSC whenever you are appearing for next examination. Okay? And I know it's easier said than done, but then that's what's the exam tending at. If you look at the papers, say from 2014, 15, 16, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16, you look at the kind of questions that are asked in CSAT, generally easy, because it was just introduced that time. Okay, there was nothing to fall back on for students that time. So obviously it made sense to have easier papers, or at least relatively easier papers. Now we have passed a decade since CSAT was introduced, and so you should be expecting that UPSC will not play the same game anymore. They will in fact make it more difficult. Whether it is unfair for non-English background students, yes, it is unfair, of course. But then going forward, the lesson for you is that you can't just invest all of your time in paper 1. Eventually, it has to be 50-50. You need to give an equal amount of time and preparation in paper 2. Many people, in fact, most of the students that I interact with, they tend to take paper 2 for granted. Don't take it for granted. This is the biggest takeaway. If the syllabus has been mentioned, you need to have mastery over it. How you do that? Well, you can use ample resources across the internet, notes, guidance, all of that can be done. Okay? And again, so this is the primary takeaway, guys. There's no sense blaming UPSC. Okay? Previous generations have played that game with UPSC and lost. They've faded into oblivion. And going forward also, there will be students who will feel, yeah, it was wrong. Of course. But then what can you do about it? Nothing. So probably for the coming EPFO paper, prepare in a manner in which you have covered each and every part of the syllabus to the maximum. Okay? That's the only way you can take this whole thing forward, guys. That's my only advice to you. For those of you who reached out to me, I empathize with you. At no point I am saying that your grievance is wrong. But then please learn from this. There's no point playing the blame game here and saying, UPSC was wrong and this and that. You are justifying. I get it. It's in our nature to justify things. However, if a civil servant, if you were to think from a point of an administrator or a civil servant, well, there will be challenges across different realms. It will happen in the future. Things will not pan out the way you want them to pan out. Okay? Life is not so rosy. If it were, then everyone would be a civil servant. No? So that's my only takeaway. Again, I completely empathize with you. Don't take it at the fact that, I'm saying that your grievance is wrong. No, it's not wrong. But then a course correction is required, especially for UPSC. It's not that simple. It's not that straightforward. There will be challenges. There will be surprises. Your goal should be to arm yourself with the best knowledge, the best method. At least from the prelims perspective, make sure that you give ample amount of time to CSAT. For mains perspective, go with the fact that you can analyze a topic, which is my focus in this editorial edge in this newspaper series. Facts are available aplenty. Every coaching institute will have these fat notebooks, monthly magazines come out, which gathers dust in some corner of the aspirants room. Okay. My point of this 1 hour is that I arm you with the analysis so that you are able to write it in different papers, not just in say GS2, GS3, GS4 or GS1, no. Probably in essays also. Why not? Have you seen the essay topics? Well, they require you the power of analysis. They require you to have good vocabulary. Again, is it unfair for non-English students? Absolutely. But then that's the way it is. Okay. So this is my method. This is the way what I'm advocating for. Okay. Again, if for those of you who want to reach out to me for anything else, some people have responded individually. They had genuine grievances. A large majority of you sent me, what did UPSC do, this, that. I get it, guys. I completely empathize. But then the only advice I can give you is move forward. Get out of that hangover. Get back to your books. Probably take 3-4 days break. Go to your parents, your brother, your sister, your pet, your partner, whoever it is. Spend some time with them. Figure out why you have got into this process. What's your motivation for UPSC? That has to be very clear. Whatever be the motivation, it could be a pecuniary motivation, or you could say I require civil service to probably get married, whatever it be. I'm no one to judge that. But then that motivation should be strong enough for you to make sure that you sit down for 8 hours, 10 hours daily and slog it out. Grind it out daily. Okay, so that motivation needs to be found by each one of you individually. All right. Okay, now we'll move forward because again, we have two important topics to deal for the day. But before I do take you back to the articles, here is my email ID. So if you have any particular questions, any particular method that you would like me to discuss with you, any particular grievance, doubts, well, this is my email ID, bhuvan.jha@studyiq.com. Shoot me an email and I'll be happy to respond back to you. That's why I'm here. Okay. That's why I'm here every morning, so that I can interact with you. I can clear your doubts. I can make sure that at least you're armed with the best knowledge when you go and appear for the mains or interview or prelims. That's my only motivation for being here. Or else I'd love to sleep on a Saturday morning, honestly. Okay, fine. We'll move forward. And these are the 2 articles that I have for you, my dear students. The first one is obviously to do with the carbon problem. Again, an article that you will find in the major dailies, i.e. Express, Hindu. Most of them have covered this, and for good measure, because again, it's a very important topic. And from the mains perspective, an extremely important topic. In fact, if you're taking down notes of these classes, make sure that you star mark this. Okay. Why? Because this question has 2 ramifications, this particular topic. One is to do with environmental concerns, obviously, since it involves carbon. It has to do with environmental concerns. And secondly, it has to do with protectionism. That now countries are turning to protectionism in the name of environmental conservation. Okay, so it has to do with trade and protectionism too. And like I told you, when you have these kind of topics that have multiple tangents, it becomes important for you to make sure that you know both the tangents. What's the correlation there? Okay, so this is our first article. Obviously, you'll find this in all major newspapers, i.e. Hindu, everyone has covered. Okay, so if you want after the class, go ahead, have a look at the article and see if it correlates with what you learned here in the course of the next say 50 odd minutes. Okay, the second one is an article that I have picked from the ORF, again, Observer Research Foundation. premier think tank of India. And this article has been written by Sameer Saran, the president of ORF. Okay, very important article, and it talks about the UNSC reforms. Okay, and you must be aware now that this is a topic that is now picking up steam. Okay, something that has been avoided for a large part of our history, at least mankind's history, humankind's history, now needs to be addressed. So UNSC reforms is the second part that we'll be discussing today. Two very important topics. All right. So we'll begin with the first one, and that is international trade has a carbon problem. Since it is again a dual nature topic, it involves both environmental conservation as well as trade and tariffs and protectionism. We'll have a look at that first. So going forward now, first let's look at the question. Every morning I have a question for you. Hi San. No, not at all. It's my job, guys. It's completely, you don't have to thank me. I know what you guys feel, guys. Okay, I have been in your position. I completely empathize. If I was in your position, I'd be up in arms too. Okay, so you don't have to thank me. I am glad if it motivates you. Go ahead. Take a break for 2-3 days. I'm not saying कि आज से ही पढ़ना चालू कर दो. Take a break for 2-3 days. Let that result sink in. Detox your body from the effects or after effects of UPSC and get back to it again. Okay. All right. So we'll look at this first. Number one, decarbonization involves reducing the levels of CO2 only and excludes agriculture sector from its purview. So what does decarbonization essentially mean? You know, you need to understand the definition of decarbonization and what are the different tangents involved when you talk about decarbonization. All right. Okay. And the second one is the Indian carbon mechanism. So if you haven't heard of the Indian carbon mechanism, well, it's again being, it's under development, you know. It's about carbon trading. Does India have a mechanism for carbon trading? So the Indian carbon mechanism is being developed by the Bureau of Energy Efficiency. You must have seen the BEE on bulbs and all of that. They'll be giving ratings. How efficient is a particular bulb or a particular appliance? So is this being developed by the Bureau of Energy Efficiency? CBDR, Common but Differentiated Responsibilities. Where does it owe its origin to? Was it in the Rio Summit of 1992? Obviously, this is under the auspices of UNFCCC. Okay, so we'll have a look at all of these together and then we'll answer this question before I move on to the second topic. If you do know the answer to this, quickly shoot me the answer in the comment box. Okay. All right. So we'll move forward now. The first question first. So we are going to understand and discuss this particular issue. The carbon border adjustment mechanism. What is the carbon border adjustment mechanism? Now understand it in a simple manner. Okay. Before we go forward, understand it very simply. European Union, a technologically advanced area. Okay, lot of finances, lots of money. Now compare European Union to say India. Okay, we do not have the kind of technology, the kind of finances as compared to European Union. Now for example, let me just, for example, in European Union, if there is a particular company, right? If there is a particular company that is, say, involved in production of a particular entity. Now, what they are doing is, because they have the money, because they have the resources, they are investing heavily, which means they are looking to offset carbon, that the carbon emissions should come down. So they have the liquid amount of cash to, say, invest in technology so that the carbon emission that is required or will come out for development of a particular product, that can be minimized. So essentially what is happening is that the cost of production in EU has gone up. Why? Because carbon emissions is a problem that they want to address. Now compare that to India. Here we are essentially driven by coal. Our production, whole supply chain. In fact, if you look at how the energy comes for producing a particular entity, it is more or most likely coal. So India now is its cost of production is relatively low. So what is going to happen? What's the natural consequence of this now? Forget all of this. We'll come to this later. What's the natural consequence? As someone in EU, you will be tempted to say, you know what? I'm not going to buy products from EU because they are expensive. I'm going to buy products from India because they are not expensive. So Indian exports will increase. European Union imports consequently will also increase. Which means that the local producer in European Union, well, that person is at an inherent disadvantage. Why? Because he didn't choose to have that policy, let's go ahead and reduce carbon emissions. It was mandated by the government. So they are up in arms. They are like, why are you killing my market? Okay. So now the European Union comes up with a strategy. They're like, okay, we'll look after your interests too. What we will do is that for any import coming from, say, India, okay, since it's coming from India, we are going to impose a carbon tax. What will be the carbon tax? The amount of carbon that is spent in generating that product, we will ask them to give money on that. Okay. So now the Indian side is like, hey, hang on, 1 second. Is that not discriminatory? Is that unfair or not? You tell me. Because under the World Trade Organization, WTO rules, you must be aware that the WTO, well, it looks after many things. No, it looks after trade, it looks after tariff, it looks after intellectual property rights, it looks after agriculture. So it basically has rules for everything. The GATT rules, you must have heard of this. General Agreement on Trade and Tariff. So, which means that can you impose discriminatory sort of taxes on imports from a particular country? You can't. Today, you cannot impose heavy say taxes on imports from a particular country like China without any valid reason. That would become discriminatory. So if China goes to WTO, well, WTO will say, yes, India is wrong. How can you suddenly do this? Okay. But then there is a clause. Like most government rules, no, there'll always be an escape. Here also there is an escape. And what is the escape? The exception is that, well, you can impose these kind of taxes provided that it involves conservation of exhaustible natural resources. Okay, this is the one. If you want to write it down, do write it down, that it's to do with conservation of environmental resources. On this particular tangent, you are allowed to apply taxes, right? So the European Union has essentially taken this principle and they have magnified the principle. Okay. So what they have done now, let's go through the topic and then it will be very clear for you whether it is discriminatory or not, what is the Indian aspect, what is the Indian grievance also. Because if I am an exporter in India and suddenly I am told that, well, I am spending 100 rupees to send something to EU, but from say 2 years down the line, this is going to become 200. Yes, my whole profit margin is gone. In fact, I'll be in loss. So that means it's a massive problem for our people who are exporting to, say, European Union. Not just India, across the developing countries. Because these people, at least Indian context, we do not have the money, we do not have the capacity to invest heavily in carbon offsetting. Right now, we do not have that. We are developing the capability to do that. However, European Union has flush amount of money, which is why they are doing it at home first. But because it has driven up the cost of the production, so suddenly they are like, oh my God, now we are going to be at inherent disadvantage from the Indian producer. So now let's go to the topic and understand what exactly is the crux of the matter. All right. So the European Union has now announced that under this particular thing, the Carbon Border Adjustment Mechanism, okay, fancy name, essentially it is to do with just carbon tax. Okay. So the CBAM, it will levy a carbon tax on imports of products which are not environmentally sustainable or are non-green. Okay. So anything that is involving carbon emissions If you are exporting to the European Union, well, they are going to tax it. Okay. So the CBAM is a part of this particular Fit for 55 in 2023 package. This is by the European Union. And what does this package say? Fit for 55 in 2023. Make a note of this again. Very important. What it says is that EU will reduce greenhouse gas emissions by at least 55%. Make sure you take a note of the at least from the prelims perspective. Okay. How UPSC will twist this statement? That the Fit for 55 is to do with reduction of 55%. No. Reduction of at least 55%. Words matter, guys, especially in UPSC. Okay. So at least 55% by the year 2030 compared to 1990 levels in line with the European climate law. That they will reduce their emissions by at least 55% in the next 7 years. For that, now they are coming up with mechanisms in the manner in which they can achieve this particular target. Okay. So what does this particular policy aim to do now? It aims to reduce emissions by ensuring that imported goods are subject to the same carbon costs as those produced within EU. How fair is that again? Like I told you, European Union technologically advanced. Someone from say Bangladesh wanting to send to European Union, if you tax them the same carbon cost that you apply on a company in European Union, how will that Bangladesh company survive? Okay. Can it be possible for them to even retain the profit margin? No. So the long-term objective of this is the short-term objective. In the next 7 years, this is what they're looking to do. Reduce it by 55%. But the long-term objective of this is, it will ensure that its climate objectives are not undermined by carbon-intensive imports. And it will spur cleaner production in the rest of the world. They are essentially wanting to become the agents of change. That since we will do this, the rest of the world will follow suit. Yes, common sense has gone to sleep right now for the European Union. Okay, they've completely let go of common sense. They're like, since we have the ability to do it, everyone else will also have the ability to do it. Okay, a European Union, the combined population might be less than Uttar Pradesh, but then look at the lofty ambitions and ideals they have. Okay, so the reporting has to begin from the 1st of October this year. Just reporting that, okay, this amount of production I am getting in, this is the carbon cost. No money is being charged right now. Just having a sense, a sort of survey they are doing right now. Okay. And in 2026, they are going to start this tax. This is the whole crux of the matter, guys. European Union will levy carbon tax on imports from those countries which are spending a lot of carbon, which are emitting a lot of carbon to produce those goods. Why? Because European Union has decided to invest money in making sure that the products that they have reduced carbon emissions, thereby leading to increased costs. So European Union is wanting to save its own market, save its own people. Fine. They are well within their rights to do that. Okay. Now let's go forward. Please make a note of this, okay? Very, very important, especially from the prelims perspective. The word at least. You look at the mock papers that will come out in 2-3 months. Most of the faculty will play with this particular word. There's nothing else. 55%, 20, 30. But then the problem will be at least, minimum. All of those words will be played in the mock papers. Okay. Now let's go forward. So how will it be implemented? How is this carbon tax going to be implemented? So it will require importers, it will require importers to declare the quantity of goods imported and their embedded greenhouse gas emissions on an annual basis. So for example, if you have product X that is moving, so it's moving from say India to EU, or let me just take the white ink, it will be better for you to see it. So if you have a product that is moving from India to EU, and for example, if India is spending say 100 tons of carbon dioxide, emission of carbon dioxide, and European Union has a limit of say 70, well, they are going to charge on the 30. Okay, that is going to be the way forward. Now, To offset these emissions, importers will need to surrender a corresponding number of certificates, the price of which will be based on an auction. The emission trading system. Now, emission trading system is very easy to understand. Very, very basic concept, but the most easy to understand. So, for example, if you have a particular company X, okay, and another company Y, okay. Now, the limit is, say, suppose 80, okay. Now, this company goes ahead and invests in, say, technology, okay. They invest in technology, they are able to make sure that their carbon emissions, which the limit was 80, they have reduced it till 60. Good, they saved 20 there. Another company, the limit is 80, but they did not have money to invest, they ended up spending 120. Now, what does emission trading say? Well, the Y folks will approach X, they will say, you know what, you have 20 extra, can you give it to me? I will pay you whatever sum is required. So they will give the leftover 20 to these fellows. So now he's come to 100. Probably approach another party, bring it down to 80. What is essentially happening is that the carbon that is coming out in the atmosphere remains constant and the prices are negotiated in a manner in which it is fair for both parties. Okay? This is emission trading system, nothing else. The fact that you can have a zero-sum game when it comes to carbon emissions is emission trading system. So this is the whole point of the exercise, that they are going to do all of this based on a weekly average auction, and then this will be the method. The emission trading system will be followed. Okay. Now another concept that you should be aware of in this whole conversation is regarding decarbonization. The question in the first slide was to do with decarbonization. Like the name gives it away, decarbonization is to do with reducing carbon dioxide, the emissions of carbon dioxide, greenhouse gases. How are you going to reduce it? What's the manner? What's the procedure? So decarbonization refers to the process of eliminating GHGs, especially carbon dioxide, from human activities such as transportation, power generation, manufacturing and agriculture also. Why? Because agriculture involves, say, livestock. Livestock, you know, is the largest emitter of methane. Okay. So they are looking to do all of this. All of these sectors will be a part of the decarbonization model. This is the aim essentially. Again, a very important concept from the prelims perspective. Expect, well, at least expect questions. Okay. They will twist this whole thing around and probably make it seem like, look at the question here that I had for you. Look at this question here and you will understand. Decarbonization involves reducing the levels of CO2 only. Only CO2 or GHG? Especially CO2. So, just not CO2. And excludes agriculture? No, it includes agriculture because agriculture has livestock. How can you exclude agriculture and then hope to have a decarbonization mission that will be successful? That's not going to work out. Okay, you're not addressing the root problem only. So this statement is incorrect. Okay, now we go forward and have a look. So when this has been understood, if you have understood the carbon border adjustment mechanism, why EU is doing what it is doing, this is important here guys from the mains perspective. Very important for you to understand the rationale of the European Union. How are they trying to justify what they are doing? Okay. Now when you go forward and have a look at this, carbon leakage. Another term, again very important. What is carbon leakage? Well, the situation that may occur if for reasons of cost, business were to transfer production to other countries with laxer emission constraints. Since European Union has decided to be the big boss and said, you know what, we will have technology that will reduce carbon emissions, and so the cost of the production will go up. So if I am a European guy and if I am saying, okay, here is my company, if I was spending 100 rupees to produce something, now I'm having to spend 120, But if I can do it for 80 in India, why should I put my factory in EU? What's the point? What's the point? I would rather go to India. Why? Because firstly, they do not have such strict carbon emission rules. Secondly, at the same time, manpower is cheap and all of those other things. So it makes sense for a European person to probably set up their production house in India. Okay. So this carbon leakage refers to that phenomenon that because of these tighter rules that are coming up, companies, production houses may be tempted to shift those production houses from those areas to say other areas. India, Bangladesh, Philippines, where they do not have that kind of strict emission rules. In fact, in India's case, we are still learning. We have just begun. Okay? How can you compare European Union with its whole century of industrial expansion and opportunity, and they have been the masters of colonialism and everything? How can you have the colonialists and the colonizers and those who were colonized on the same platform? That's historical injustice. That is climate injustice. You must have heard of climate justice, wherein people from the global south are now having to bear the cost of over-exploitation of natural resources by the Western world. Today you have all of these massive storms that hit Pakistan, for example. Just last year, 1/3 of Pakistan was flooded. Okay? Massive rainfalls. Why did that happen? Well, probably because you had these countries that over-exploited their resources to the extent that, well, now all of that change, all of that ramifications, all of the consequence of that over-exploitation is now being felt in the developing world. So how can Pakistan be expected to bear the brunt of that? Why should they pay for someone else's mistakes? This is essentially to do with another concept, which is the loss and damage concept. Very important. We'll do it in detail probably sometime next week. The loss and damage concept, which was adopted in Sharm el-Sheikh, COP27. Okay. So Sharm el-Sheikh, they had loss and damage concept. And it is again not very easy. What's the basic problem behind loss and damage concept? Should I tell you in one line? How do you solve the problem of attribution? What is attribution? To say that, okay, that person is responsible. Okay. So now the Western world is saying, how are we to blame? How can you say that we are to blame? Okay. Do you have any scientific research to say, okay, X country is to blame? Can you say that? That the flood in Pakistan came because of the exploitation of X country? No. It's a whole geographical expanse that has involved in over-exploitation of natural resources. At the same time, there is a human connotation to it also. You had the colonialist forces who colonized, say, Asia. At least Indian subcontinent, they colonized Africa. My God, they have done what they have not done in anywhere else in terms of resource exploitation. So it's not just to do with resource exploitation, it's to do with humans. You are going and there is a human angle to all of that. How do you solve all of that? How do you attribute that why the floods came in Pakistan or why the glaciers are melting in Everest? And can you conclusively say that all of that is happening only because of the actions of, say, one country or a group of countries? No. Can you exclude China from the discussion, who have also burnt a lot of coal? Okay, now they are also quite developed. They have also said, no, we have come out of poverty. We have raised 100 million people out of poverty in the last 5 years, 10 years, whatever they claim. So if you have done that, which means you have used up resources, which means you have invested somewhere to make sure that the people have access to opportunities. Should China be also excluded from that? So many connotations come up when you have these kind of conversations taking place. Okay? It's not such an easy correlation. So the European Union's whole logic that because we are able to do it, so the rest of the world should also be able to do it, is flawed right at the very beginning only. It makes no sense. Okay. So coming back now to the topic. So the carbon leakage is essentially to do with that. That because you have made cost of production in your area so expensive, people are now tempted to move their factories and their production houses to some other places. So what are the ramifications of that? Well, loss of EU demand. You will have competition coming up and free riding will come. What is free riding? Because of EU climate policy, Others see less pressure to act and hence increase their emissions. See, like I told you, the logic that I am giving you, developing countries will also be asking the same thing. That, well, since they are doing it and since the cost of production has gone up, should we also do it? What's the sense then? Can we afford to have that kind of policy? No. Which means let's keep our environmental regulation lax. Let's make sure that growth happens. Let's make sure that we have more businesses coming to our territory. So it's a very flawed concept, guys. Okay. If you have to analyze this, analyze it from that particular perspective. Okay. Now when you go forward, this is again from the Indian perspective. What is the impact on India out of this whole European Union's action? What is the impact on us? Very important again for you to at least be aware of. So iron, steel, aluminium, well, we are essentially doing well in this. We have an industry, a burgeoning industry when it comes to iron, steel, aluminium, other things also, fuel export, all of that. Now, all of this is carbon intensive. Very, very carbon intensive. They are carbon intensive processes. Okay? So, the carbon intensity of Indian products is higher, obviously. Why? We are a coal dependent economy. Even to produce a simple object, you need to burn coal. Our renewable capacity is still growing. Okay? So, can you compare in the European Union to India? Again, unfair comparison. If we had the money, we would also do it. If we had the capacity, we would also invest in, say, non-coal resources. But we have limited amount of money. We have a 140 crore population to look after. European Union has probably 140 people. Different priorities. So they can afford to be like, okay, we are holier than thou. We will go ahead and worry about carbon emissions. Here we have to worry about feeding our people first. Okay. So different priorities. How can you have different priorities being judged similarly? Again, unfair. Okay. Since India has no domestic carbon pricing scheme, now look at this. At the moment, we do not have a carbon pricing scheme. Like I told you, for this particular activity here, this trading system. So, because we do not have a carbon pricing scheme right now, how do you price the emissions? 1 ton of carbon equivalent to what? How much money? It's being developed, which is being developed by the Bureau of Energy Efficiency. Okay, there are other ministries involved also. You have the Ministry of Forest, Climate Change, other ministries that have come up, and there is consultation happening right now. See, we are in the consultation phase only. Okay, how can you, again, just this inherent mismatch, disparity. Okay, so because we do not have this in place, this whole thing poses a greater risk to export competitiveness. Which means our folks, our business guys will have to spend more to export to, say, the European Union. As other countries with a carbon pricing system in place might have to pay less carbon tax or get exemptions. Because we lack this institutional thing, domestic carbon pricing scheme. It's an institutional thing, it's an institutional lacuna. And for example, if other country, they have this pricing scheme, they will negotiate now. They'll say, let's do this, sit on a table, negotiate. You give me X amount, I'll give you Y amount. Fine. But right now, we do not know what our X amount is only. So how can you negotiate? So again, institutional lacuna of Indian side. India could negotiate with the EU to recognize its energy taxes as equivalent to a carbon price, which would make its exports less susceptible to the CBAM. We have energy taxes in place on a domestic scale. Can you have an equivalence of the domestic energy taxes and say what the European Union is asking for? Can they be similar? It's unclear. We will probably put forth that point of view to the European side, to the European Union side. Whether they agree to it or not, again, is something for the days to come, we'll see. India could also approach the WTO and say, you know what, this whole pricing mechanism is discriminatory. It makes no sense. European Union could say that it is to do with conservation of exhaustible natural resources. that it is to do with environmental conservation, and so it's under the exception allowed under WTO. So it's again a very complex problem, guys. It's not something simple, because you see the tangents that are involved here. There's a human tangent, there's an economic tangent, then there is an environmental tangent, international relations tangent. It's a very perfect question for a mains answer, for a mains question at least. It has all the ingredients for a mains question. Why? Because you cannot, just beat around the bush in this answer. If you try to beat around the bush, you'll be caught. There are certain aspects, certain concepts that you need to be aware of. You need to know about one, and have a look at this. Make a note of this also, guys. Okay. You need to know first about the CBAM. You need to know about carbon offsetting. You need to know about European Union's rules. You also need to know about carbon intensive imports. Why is India carbon intensive? How can it, say, probably reduce? You also need to know about carbon leakage from the European Union side. And then finally you will come to say whether the domestic energy taxes of India, can they be equivalent to what the European Union is asking for? And whether India approaching the World Trade Organization, will that have any ramifications, positive consequences for India? What are the chances? Will the European Union's perspective that it is to do with conservation of exhaustible natural resources, will that also stand true? Okay. So again, a very difficult, very complex idea, guys. So my advice to you is that after this whole class is over, go to the newspaper, read that article and correlate with the sequence that I've given you. If you are able to correlate with the sequence that I've provided with you, you will have the ingredients for a good mains answer. And for those of you who would like me to, again, have a look at your answers, write an answer for me on the CBAM, okay, and the European Union versus India perspective, whether it is justified or not. If it is justified, why? If it is not justified, why? Write an answer, 200 words. It will not take you more than 15 minutes. If it takes you 15 minutes, in fact, it's a lot. But for the time being, let's begin. 15 minutes, all I ask of you. Write an answer in the comment box. What's your opinion? Because you know what? This analysis, this capacity to analyze is not going to come overnight. Especially if you're looking for, say, this year's mains or next year mains, you will have to invest time and effort in framing an answer, in framing an argument. Mains is so different from prelims, guys. If any of you have appeared, I'll tell you. If not appeared, I'll tell you. Prelims, if you know facts more or less, paper 1 can be done with. In mains, facts enough is not going to lead you anywhere. In fact, you will be stumped. First time you see GS1 paper, you will be like, what nonsense is this? Because you do not have the capacity to analyze only. Okay? So this was the first article for the day. Extremely important article. Please go ahead after the class and have a look at it. And if you have any doubts, reach out to me, please. Okay? I implore you, I request you. Alright. So now that this has been done, again, extremely important article. But now we come to the second part. The structure of the UNSC is perverse, immoral, and perpetuation of the colonization project. Analyze. Okay. It is to do with UNSC. Essentially, you understand that it is to do with UNSC reforms. United Nations Security Council. Okay. United Nations Security Council. You have been aware of this. P5 plus the non-permanent members. P5, you know the countries that are part of P5. The non-permanent members get elected. Term of every 2 years. All that is theory. You will find that any coaching class notes. That's okay. That's no problem. But now the analysis. Whether it is perverse, which means wrong, immoral, you know what immoral means, and whether it is a continuation of the colonization project. Why? Why is this line being said, guys? You know the members of the P5, UK, US, Russia, France, China. How many of them are Western countries? UK, US, France, to an extent Russia and China are together right now. So you have a 3/2 majority, you can say, how it is lined up. So we'll understand this very quickly now as to whether it is indeed perverse, immoral, and a continuation of something that was started in the post-World War phase but is still continuing after probably a whole generation has passed after World War. Does it make sense to have a body that does not reflect the needs of the contemporary times? Okay, so let's look at this now. The United Nations Security Council is constituted to further the colonization project. That's the article. Again, for those of you who'd like to read it, it's on the website of ORF, written by their president, Samir Saran. You know what ORF does? It also does the Raisina dialogue. Yes, you must have heard of the Raisina dialogue, wherein you have the Prime Minister address, some big foreign dignitary comes. The President of Norway I think had come just recently. So this time you had the Russian Foreign Minister. He also came. So it's a major showpiece event of the Indian think tank, the Indian Academia Circle, again supported by the Ministry of External Affairs. So now, before I come to the whole conversation, have a look at this speech by the Prime Minister of India. And he made this speech recently in the G7 summit that was held in Hiroshima. Yes, you must be aware of this particular summit that just happened, concluded recently in Hiroshima. So there he makes a very important point, guys. Look at this. He says, why does the United Nations fail to prevent conflict today? First question. Why even the definition of terrorism has not been accepted in the United Nations yet? Again, important question. And then he says, the Prime Minister says, if introspection is done, then one thing is clear. You can quote this line in the answer, guys. Exceptionally well put. Whoever did it from the Ministry of External Affairs, whoever wrote the speech, they know what they're writing about. He says, the institutions created in the last century are not in line with the system of the 21st century. They do not reflect the realities of the present. Strong lines coming from the Prime Minister when he's talking about a multilateral institution like, say, the United Nations, UNSC. That essentially, United Nations has failed. That it has outlived its utility. Okay? That is why it is necessary that reforms should be given concrete shape. It will have to become the voice of the Global South. Why the Global South has been included in this conversation? Because if you look at how the structure of United Nations is set up, you find that all of the P5 are to do with developed nations, rich nations, militarily mightful nations. Okay? The Global South is completely excluded from the conversation. Otherwise, we will just keep talking about ending conflict. United Nations and Security Council will just become a talk shop. What is a talk shop? In Calcutta, you have people who will sit around in the afternoon or in the evening with a cup of chai and they'll just discuss, debate. So it's called in Bengali, it is called Adda. Okay? Essentially, this is what he's saying. That it is to do with it's like all talks and no action. Can the United Nations survive with that sort of outlook and approach in the 21st century? This is the Prime Minister of India who's saying this in a carefully drafted statement at a time when all of the big shots are present. So which means India's stand is clear. The stand of India has been vocalized very clearly that if you do not introduce reforms in the United Nations architecture, if you do not introduce reforms in the UNSC, it will eventually go the way of League of Nations. That how the League of Nations failed, for whatever reasons, okay, United Nations will also fail. Why? Firstly, because it is not inclusive. Secondly, afraid of reforms. And thirdly, it is serving to further the interests of just 5 countries. You have 190 plus countries in the United Nations. Yes? Does it make sense to have such inordinate power in the hands of just 5 countries? Does it make sense? You and I, we both know, we have heard that all human beings are created equal. Yes? One Indian woman was there who made the change. All men are created equal was supposed to be the first line of the charter. So when all human beings are created equal, so the countries which comprise of human beings, why are they treated unequally? What's the sense behind that? So now we'll understand the topic very quickly. Let's look at this now. So in 1945, when the United Nations had 51 members, the charter stipulated that UNSC would consist the P5, US, UK, France, that time Soviet Union and China. Then there were 6 elected non-permanent members, which essentially were to be elected for a period of 2 years on a rotational basis. Okay. So now how were these P5 selected? What was the rationale behind that? That is for us to very quickly understand. Because if you have to criticize something, you need to understand the origin first. So the selection was done based on the role in the maintenance of international peace and equitable geographical contribution. This is again for the elected members, the non-permanent members. Whereas the P5 was to do with Oppenheim's international law. Quote this in the answer when you're writing in mains. Showcase that you know about Oppenheim's international law, because half the public won't. They wouldn't have heard of it also. Okay. So Oppenheim's international law says permanent membership in the Security Council was granted to 5 states based on their importance after World War II. That time they were important, so let's give them P5 membership, permanent 5 membership. Let's give them veto power also. All of that done, why? At a time when World War II had finished. So those countries were important then. And the biggest example of this is United Kingdom. The country that it was in post-World War, just after World War, and the country that it is now, there's a huge difference. Huge difference. Why should that country be in P5? Why should the others be also, in fact? What have they done so special that they should be a part of P5? How can you justify the exclusion of major economies? India, Brazil, South Africa. Why? What's the rationale? How can you claim to be a representative body if a population of 140 crore is not represented there? And we are not like some authoritarian state also, no? We are a fully functioning democracy. I don't care whoever says what. The newspaper articles can print themselves. But we are a fully functional democracy. I have a right to vote, you have a right to vote. So what sense does it make? So now, when you go forward, you understand this. So finally, in 1965, you had 117 states that were part of the United Nations, and then a resolution was adopted, Resolution 1991, in which the non-permanent members, they were increased from 6 to 10. And this was in fact the last reform of the United Nations till now. The last and only reform of the United Nations. Okay, after that there has been no changes only. So the question of equitable representation has been on the agenda of the United Nations General Assembly for over 30 years. You think Indian bureaucracy is slow? You should see United Nations bureaucracy. Yeah, they will put your Indian bureaucracy to shame only. They are another level lazy. For 30 years, they have been poring over a question. No answers yet. Okay. Why? Because it's a very convoluted problem. It's essentially to do with you are asking the P5 to give the power that they have been bestowed with. Why would they give up the power? Okay. What's in it for them? They will ask. How do those people benefit? So the counter argument is you have benefited enough. You have benefited enough since the formation of United Nations. You have furthered the table of the P5 for your own narrow interests. How, you might ask? So many examples, For if there is a resolution on action against China for their human rights abuses, China will veto it. That resolution is dropped. If there is a resolution on Russian actions against Ukraine, Russia vetoes it. Resolution dropped. United States, something they have done, there will be a resolution moved. Obviously, they'll veto it. Dropped. So essentially you are held hostage. This whole United Nations architecture is held hostage by these 5 countries. Okay, so now let's go forward. Again, this is important. Why? For you to understand the intergovernmental negotiations. What the UPSC will do is, they'll ask you whether intergovernmental negotiations are to do with climate change or are they do to with, they'll give you some 4 other options. Some random options they'll give you. The moment you see negotiations, half the Tukka public, the guest master public will think it's to something to do with climate change. But the IGN is to do essentially with the reforms. This negotiation is to do with reforms of the United Nations, and it was launched in 2007. See, it's to do with the UNSC reforms. Again, know about this. Which sector? What are they negotiating? These people, the IGN. Okay. So this is what the tenets of the negotiations are. Categorization of membership, this whole dichotomy between permanent members and non-permanent members, whether that is true, whether that should be the way you should go forward. Veto question, like I told you, a major problem. What sense does it have to include veto is beyond me. Okay. How can you have certain countries lord over other countries and say, you know what, it is in your best interest, so I'm going to veto it. No. You can't decide for me. All countries are capable to decide for themselves. We don't need a bunch of white folk to tell us what to do. No. So question of veto is also there. Regional representation, like I told you, most of them are to do with the global north. In fact, all of them, barring China, which probably might be right now in the transition period, the transition area between global south and global north. Okay. So regional representation is not there. No inclusivity. Africa does not have a country only. Okay. Latin America, no country only, left completely. It does not exist only for the United Nations Security Council. Size and working and the relationship between UNSC and the General Assembly. So this was the mandate of the IGN. On paper, perfect, good thoughts, good ideals. Let's see what happened then. Considering that this whole thing has been lying in a dusty file for 30 years, so what is the way forward now? What have they done exactly? And this is where our foreign minister comes in. You know, he is very clear forward when he says, when he speaks, he speaks sense. So he says essentially, look at this. There is no record keeping that allows progress to be recognized and carried forward. The biggest problem of the IGN, the intergovernmental negotiation process. Essentially, there is no minutes of the meeting. Whenever you go to a meeting, important meeting, minutes of meeting are kept, so as to make sure that you have a record of whatever was discussed. IGN process does not maintain only. They're like, you come, have coffee, yap, go home. What's the point? Okay. The IGN process works with neither a text, look at this. There is no text, no mandate, no procedure, and no deadline. And who says this? Well, Ambassador Saba Korosi, who is the UNGA president. He was the former president of Hungary. So this is the UNGA, the General Assembly president, saying that, well, this is essentially a process which is just, there is no point to it. There is no text, no procedure, no deadline. Which is why for 30 years, this has been going on. Why? Because there is just no mandate. There is no sincerity of application. All they're doing is just words, no actions. Okay? Not just that, there are actually suggestions that negotiations start when consensus has been achieved. Look at the fallacy of this. How can you have consensus first and then negotiate? Consensus is what? Agreement. So, essentially what the foreign minister is saying is that first what this whole process demands is that all countries agree to this. Okay? And then we will negotiate the way forward. Does it make sense, guys? Is it not you should understand the cause effect, no? The cause is the negotiation, the effect is the consensus. But then these people in all their wisdom are like, no, the cause should be a consensus and then the effect will be negotiation. It's like putting the cart before the horse. Ideally what? The horse pulls the cart, no? But for these educated folks, the cart will pull the horse. How is it going to work? Essentially, the sincerity of discussion, the sincerity of application is missing only. All right. So now when we go forward, have a look at this. This is again Saba Korosi, and this is our foreign minister, and this is the criticism of the IGN process. That there is no text, no deadline, no procedure. Okay? That this is the biggest criticism actually, by the way, that negotiations should start when consensus has been achieved. And what the foreign minister says, surely we cannot have a more extreme case of putting the cart before the horse. That essentially it's the horse that leads the cart. Yes? But what the foreign minister is saying is here the cart is pulling the horse is just walking piche piche. So now, what are the reforms? What are the reforms? How should you go about it? A proposal. So agreement of at least 2/3 of United Nations members in a vote in the General Assembly and must be ratified by 2/3 of the member states. Well, this can be taken care of. Okay, that 2/3 of the UNGA must agree to it and 2/3 must ratify it. Okay, that people will do. It's again to do with the developing, the poor countries. They will agree among themselves very fast because they want reforms. The problem area is this. Once again, look at how the whole organization is set up. It's like a bully club. Okay, that all of the permanent members of the UNSC must also agree. Here is where the problem will arise. Why will the permanent members agree to reforms? It's like IAS, you ask an Indian Administrative Service officer to give up their power and give it to IPS. They'll be like, no, why? Why should I do it? Similarly, what is it for me? Nothing. You are asked to decentralize your power, but they'll not agree to it. No? And you are saying, okay, the IS will only pass that order saying, you know what, half of my powers are going to IPS. They will not do it. Done. End of the story. So, when you go forward and you have a look at this now, why? Why is it important? The Security Council's membership does not represent the needs of the international community. What the Prime Minister said at the G7 summit, that this particular organization has outlived its utility. That it is not fair that an organization with exclusive membership that was set up in post-World War II, that should now be the harbingers, the leaders of this world in the 21st century when so much has changed. No longer are the world interplay of nations, the world credibility of nations, rise of nations. Well, there's so many other powers that have come up. It's no more a bipolar world. It's a multipolar world. So how can you have power being concentrated in these 5 entities only? And the veto hamstring, like I told you, big problem. The veto essentially is the biggest criticism of the United Nations. As to why it was done in the first place, so that these countries would be the moral force behind the emergence of the world. After World War II, these will be the leaders who will take the world forward. Guess what? All of these countries are also neck deep in all sorts of abuses, human rights abuses. So how can you have a bully lead? How can you have someone who is accused of human rights abuses claim to be sanctimonious and say, you know what, your country is doing this? No. Look in the mirror, no, first. Essentially, the veto problem is to that it whitewashes their actions, whereas the actions of the others, well, it's not whitewashed, it is laid for everyone to see. Okay. So, the membership now, like I told you, very easy to understand. It is dominated by the West, the great powers, again, I wouldn't call them great powers, just the West, where the global South and smaller states are marginalized. Which is why the Prime Minister is saying the aspirations of the global South are not being met. Which is why the conversation has now come that India is becoming a voice of the global South. Whereas other countries speak about themselves, India has said, you know what, it's not just about us, it is also to do with the host of other countries that you have ignored for the last 70 odd years. Okay? There are no permanent members from Latin America, Africa. No, they don't exist only for the UNSC. And China is the only Asian member. Imagine this, no Japan, okay, no South Korea, no India. How can you claim it to be a representative body? No Brazil, no Indonesia, no South Africa, countries that have vibrant economies, good military might. But no, for the UNSC, the P5, they don't matter. We are the ones. हम करेंगे सब. ठीक है? Majority of the UN peacekeeping, you must know, na, India is the biggest contributor to peacekeeping operations. We send the largest amount of people from Africa to wherever you want. Our people are there. Our regiments are working. Blue berets, they are called. They wear the blue cap. Okay. So if again the conversation so arises, if you want human resources from these other countries, why are you not giving them membership? Why are you not giving them equal respect? If you are so good, so intelligent, so powerful and so mighty, you also send your people. No. There it becomes, no, my white folks will get malaria and dengue when they go to Somalia. Indians we will manage. Why? Because we are sturdy people. We know how to deal with any sort of adversity. But then they will get all health issues, running, loose motion, this, that nonsense will happen. Okay. So now who are the countries that are expected? First you have Brazil, you have Mexico from Latin America and Caribbean. From Africa, these countries have staked their claims. Nigeria, South Africa, Egypt. From Asia Pacific, India, Japan, Indonesia. From Eastern Europe, Poland and Ukraine have also said that they also want to be a part of this. And from Western Europe, Germany. All of these nations, look at the countries, guys. All of them are capable nations. Nations with good standing, good force, good economics. They're not countries like, say, who will refuse IMF bailout because they do not have political stability. All stable countries. So their case is very strong, extremely strong. Okay, which is why UNSC reforms should be done now. If it's not done now, League of Nations Part 2 will happen for sure. Okay. So going forward now, the counter arguments. Now this is the argument that is given by the P5 as to why you should not have these countries come in the permanent membership. Why the reforms of the United Nations Security Council should not be done. Now the flimsy reasons that they give. They essentially say that it's a problem of regional representation versus finding suitable candidates. They're like, we are agreeing for regional representation. But then, which are the suitable candidates? Who are the ones that we should have? And then what they do is, they take out all of these rankings that come out. Freedom House's democracy rankings, Human Freedom Index. Again, all of these rankings are sponsored in some manner by countries that belong to the P5. So they essentially use these rankings to justify their complete indifference for reforms. One might also question how these rankings are arrived at. What's the methodology? One thing that India always says, that okay, you have ranked us so below in the list, but then what's your methodology? What's your sample size? Okay, no such information, or at least not a lot of information is provided in that context. So you have these democracy rankings which say that only 5 of the proposed are fully free: Brazil, South Africa, Japan, Poland, Germany. India does not qualify as fully free for them. Okay. Human Freedom Index says Brazil and South Africa are just above the median. So what essentially the P5 says is that you do not want underperformers or countries with bad reputation to have a seat at the high table. While conveniently forgetting that countries like China are no saints, United States, no saint, but you have them on the list. So what's the problem with the other countries? No explanation given. Adding countries with weaker records on democracy or human rights risks increasing issues already seen with China and Russia. Look how the 3 countries that I speak about, UK, US and France, this coalition essentially says that it's to do with China and Russia. Their actions are not proper, which is why we cannot have reforms, because the other countries are also not proper. Essentially, if it was a CSAT question, what they're implying is the only proper countries are these 3. Okay, again, a flawed argument. Considering intra-regional factors would also be necessary. Intra-regional factors? So for example, India is selected as a part of the P5. Suddenly you will have Pakistan who will be up in arms. China will be up in arms. So at the same time, if Germany is included in the P5, you will have Russia who will be up in arms. Not happy, completely not happy. From Brazil is included, then you will have some Latin American country who will be up in arms. Why not us? So they are saying that this will open a Pandora's box. That every country will now stake a claim, and so there is no proper methodology in which country should be included and which country should be excluded. Okay. So now let's look at the other argument here, the veto problem. The veto problem, like I told you, the biggest criticism of the UNSC. P5's ability to block any measure is fundamentally crippling. Like I told you, they use the veto to further their own narrow interests. This has essentially become an excuse for the P5 to further their narrow interests. So you have Russia, which has blocked all condemnation of the invasion of Ukraine. China, which has said nothing to do with Uyghurs, all is fine in Tibet. Hong Kong is the most brilliant press ever. Yeah, China is always defending its actions like, no, everything is perfect in China. And so they'll veto. Okay. Then the rights of Uyghur Muslims, the rights of Tibetans, who cares? For them, China is everything is okay. Okay. Kremlin objects to adding Japan or Germany. Like I told you, intra-regional rivalry angle here. The intra-regional rivalry. Okay. UK, France and the United States, the three Western powers essentially, they will not support membership for countries with weak human rights or democracy records. Okay. Like I told you, they will always raise this question. Palana rankings has placed India bottom, say 5 up, just 5 from the bottom. Okay, fine, agreed, taken. What's the methodology? What's the process? What's your sample set of survey? No information provided. So we are supposed to just take it as the truth because some white fellow said it. Okay. So now another proposal that was put forward was, can the General Assembly vote? Because eventually you have 5 nations of the P5. The General Assembly has around 190 countries. So can a vote of these nations override a veto of these 5? Again, a reform that was proposed, which would again require the P5 to agree to this proposal. Do you think it's going to happen, guys? Now you would have understood, no? Essentially, the problem is with the disproportionate amount of power that you have given to the P5. Okay? That you have essentially armed a monster that now looks at you at the face and says, you know what? You can't do anything. I dare you, you can't do anything. Okay? So next. All right. So this is essentially the topic that I had for you regarding UNSC reforms. And now we come to the question. The current structure of UNSC is perverse, immoral, and perpetuation of the colonialization project. Do you agree to this? With the kind of evidence that I have proved and submitted before you, what's your opinion on this? Frame an answer, guys. Frame an answer in 250 words, and 2 places where you can reach me. 1, in the comment box below. Write an answer for me. Let's make it interactive. Let's make it a learning process. Okay. So that you derive the maximum benefit out of this. Because you know what? Once you have gone through this lecture, you will not forget the UNSC reforms for a long time. Essentially, it is to do with dignity of countries, guys. We talk about human dignity. Very important. What about the dignity of a country? Yes. So, leave an answer for me in the comment box below, or you can reach out to me at this particular email ID. Once again, I request all of you, leave an answer for me. I'll be more than happy to engage with any of you who is interested in learning. Okay. Why is it so important to become a part? See, P5, if you're talking, no. See, P5 has, like I told you, disproportionate amount of power. They have the veto power. They have a larger say in world affairs. So every country wants that position. Okay. It's about like choosing the class monitor. You know, you have power over the rest of the people. Your value in the eyes of the others is different. That's the same thing with P5. They want to be the monitors of the global governance architecture. But then, normally you have people who have shown some amount of excellence in, say, studies or sports, or some amount of leadership qualities. They're appointed as monitors. You can't have someone who's been failing for 70 years in a class and then you still have that person as monitor. Then that is like your overage, which is why you are monitor. Okay, it's essentially to do with that. That you need powers that are currently improving, increasing their relevance, having a larger say in the global economics, global interplay of nations. You need them to have some sort of credibility that is attached to the United Nations and the United Nations Security Council. And you cannot have the reforms without including countries like, say, India, Germany, Japan, Brazil, South Africa. These are countries that have a very valid argument for being on the big stage. Okay? They have shown willingness to reform. They have shown willingness to adapt and adopt methods so as to serve the needs and aspirations of the people better. Right? So, again, it's a question of representation. It's a question of the dignity of a country. It's a question of giving the due importance that you owe to a country, rather than having this post-World War hangover and then saying that, it should continue for the next 70, 80 years. That's again an unfair process. Okay. Okay, so if you did like this analysis, if you did like this lecture, please may I request you guys, whoever is watching me or whoever will watch this lecture in the coming days and hours to come, please leave me a like and a comment. I really appreciate that, especially when someone leaves a comment for me or emails me. I find it happy that people are learning. I make sure that this 1 hour in the morning from 9 a.m. till 10, 10:05, 10:10, it's of maximum benefit to you. And I always make sure that I focus on lesser amount of topics, 2 to 3 topics, but in detail, in depth. Okay. Because in the race to cover a large amount of information, I don't want to compromise on the quality that you need to be armed with, especially from the exam perspective. Because this is not a news bulletin that you watch. This is an interactive platform that we have. And so my aim is that whatever you learn from here, it should stay here and you should be able to write it down on a piece of paper too. Okay. All right. So thank you once again. I will see you Monday morning at 9 a.m. Once again, before I leave, please do leave me a like and comment if you like this lecture. And if there's some particular topic that you would like me to discuss for you, please, I'd appreciate if you let me know that too. All right. On that note, it's a wrap for today, Saturday. I'll see you Monday morning, the 4th, I believe. The 5th of June at 9 a.m. IST. Till then, stay safe. Have a good weekend. Bye.